Your life is rhyming. The rhymes and rhythms of your life are syncopating, inner and outer, are sounding clearer and fuller, are moving you in marvelous, mysterious ways. Hear them, feel them, dance with them all, body and soul. It was a poem from here in Weekapaug, Rhode Island this year. Above the tree line, down in the forest of pinon or ponderosa, spruce or juniper, you can't see the terrain above, what you'll encounter from the weather to the boulders, until you hike up through the tree line, past the last twisted wood. You can really only engage from here a way up, and only as you go. Apply your wisdom or intuition of the moment to your next movement up your mountain, to the ease or challenge of your next choice, chosen momentum in the now opened out air of your ascent. Welcome all to the 26th Floating Poetry broadcast in this weekly series, coming to you live once again from Rhode Island, by the sea, the knowing sea. I'm glad you're leaning in, and from so many places of living and feeling, experiencing, wondering. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, inviting you with enthusiasm this week to explore varied dimensions of intuition, especially your own deeper intuitive nature that can serve as the most vital, pivotal inner guidance system you can rely on, especially as you move through a sea of life choices. So, let's open with some musings of mine, some thoughts by others, then on to some poems I've summoned up for us around this theme. Intuition, that deep inner guidance system, that clear and sure root knowing, source wisdom, a directional signaling, as in right for us direction, felt in your marrow, not in your head, not physical, visceral, which is the realm of our native and animal instinct, but your pure consciousness that always wants to point you, take you to, or keep you in a state of profound well-being, of what I call wholefulness, of expansion, self-evolution, full life engagement. It can be strong to subtle. And by the way, the image that you see there is a shadowgram, as I call them, a self-portrait that was made in Greece in the Cyclades some years back I think in 2012 or 13. And what I thought was apropos about this image is it shows that we are made up of so many other elements, natural elements, and nothing that we always see on the surface. So I felt that was a good image for our theme of intuition. These days, I definitely move through the world almost entirely intuitively, sensing into the energies of people, places, activities, and often far beyond their words. It's the senses, the inner senses of them, it, what have you. It guides me in everything meaningful that I do, from creating to cooking to sailing to interacting to all kinds of daily choosing, large and small. So, onto a mix of thoughts and poems I've chosen intuitively for us. And I thought we might start by, a lot of people confuse or confound the two or compound the two things, intuition and instinct, and they're quite different. And this person, I thought, put it well, Kristen Rogers in Exemplars, a blog that she's got. Is it an instinct or an intuition? Intuition is like the North Star of the human soul, an ever-present inner guide that helps us navigate the different landscapes of life. It's that impossible inner knowing, that soft spiritual nudge telling you to go this way, read that book, speak to these people, or follow that road. It's a feeling that sits in your gut like a well-portioned homemade meal, complete, comforting, and so nourishing that you can almost feel the nutrients breaking down and getting sent off to various organs and tissues in your body. You know it's right and that somehow it's working in your favor, even if you're not sure how or to what end. Feeling that nudge is simple, unavoidable even, but actually following it requires at least a little bit of faith in yourself, in divinity, synchronicity, fate, destiny, or some power greater than your conscious mind, because though intuition might tell you which way to turn, it usually doesn't offer you a glimpse of the entire map. I thought that was well said. I wanted to share that. There's another spot I came across in terms of differentiating these things, and from exploring your mind. There's an example that uses two literary characters, Robinson Crusoe. So he was a brave sailor from York who was stranded on an island, as we know, for 28 years. He used his most basic instincts to survive a perilous and complex situation. Then we have Sherlock Holmes, on the other hand, the best example of a mind trained to make use of its, quote, police intuition. His deductions are quick and precise, and with his excellent and fine-tuned intuition, he can solve the most challenging riddles. So that might help us to give a little more distinction to those things. The great French writer Alexandre Dumas said there are some situations which men understand by instinct, but which reason is powerless to explain. Yeah. And so, from a biological point of view, it's innate behavior, instinct, and captures, right, and embodies all of our internal needs and behaviors. I think of it more viscerally and physically, like self-preservation, protection, reproduction, cooperation, curiosity, basic traits, right, that define humans, but also other animals. So there we have a lick on that. There was a chap named Brian Martins who talked about poetry and intuition, and I like this quote for us. The intuitive voice, the unconscious voice, the wisdom voice within can be a very quiet voice, one that is best to approach humbly. It's usually straightforward, honest, and clear. So if we hear a debate going on in our head or a strategy forming, it's usually not intuitive, but our conscious strategizing mind. Well, as a poet, I love what I was couching that, because I'm agreeing and feeling that's where that's coming from, at least in my composing of whether it's visual, written, or spoken poetry or performed, comes from that place, not from the strategic mind. The German humanist, philosopher, and psychologist Erich Fromm, F-R-O-M-M, amazing fellow from the past, said, in terms of following our intuition often, which can lead us to such rich places, there's nothing more attractive and convincing than spontaneity, whether it is to be found in a child, in an artist, or in those individuals who cannot thus be grouped according to age or profession. Most of us can observe at least moments of our own spontaneity, which are at the same time moments of genuine happiness, whether it be the fresh and spontaneous perception of a landscape, or the dawning of some truth as the result of our thinking, or a sensuous pleasure that is not stereotyped, or the welling up of love for another person. In these moments, we all know what a spontaneous act is, and may have some vision of what human life could be if these experiences were not such rare and uncultivated occurrences. I do think we can cultivate. We can certainly seek out and cultivate our intuition, bring it more and more in. The poet and potter M.C. Richards used a metaphor of centering to consider the universe within us. Said, as our personal universes expand, and side note from me, intuition expands us greatly when we trust it, follow it, embody it. As our personal universes expand, if we keep drawing ourselves into center again and again, everything seems to enhance everything else. The activity seems to spring out of the same source: poem or pot, loaf of bread, letter to a friend, a morning's meditation, a walk in the woods, turning the compost pile, knitting a pair of shoes, weeping with pain, fainting with discouragement, burning with shame, trembling with indecision. Wisdom is a state of the total being, in which capacities for knowledge and for love, for survival and for death, for imagination, inspiration, intuition, for all the fabulous functioning of this human being who we are, come into a center with their forces, come into an experience of meaning that can voice itself as wise action. Thank you, M.C. Richardson. Beautifully said. Jeanette Winterson, the writer, art. She talks about art and the intuition and intuitive nature of many artists. And what I think feeds that intuitive self is included in that art of various kinds. Of course, the poetic arts, I believe, but other ones. Art is such a relief to us because actually it's the real world. It's the reality that we understand on a deeper level. Life has an inside as well as an outside. And at the present, the outside of life is very well catered for, and the inside of life, not at all. We can go back to books or pictures or music, film, theater, and we can find there both some release and some relief for our inner life, the place where we actually live, the place where we spend so much time. Thank you, Jeanette Winterston. So, two more, and then we'll get to some poems. The French philosopher Gaston Bachelard, if no one knows of him, wonderful artist friend of mine, introduced me to him some years back, Greg Lachey, and he's a fascinating fellow and fascinating thinker. And he said, whether it comes from suffering or whether it comes from joy, we all experience as human beings this moment of illumination at some point in our lives, a moment when we suddenly understand our own message, a moment when knowledge, by shedding light on passion, detects at once the rules and relentlessness of destiny, a truly synthetic moment when decisive failure, by rendering us conscious of the irrational, becomes the success of thought. That is the locus of the differential of knowledge, the Newtonian burst that allows us to appreciate how insight springs forth from ignorance, the sudden inflection of human genius upon the curvature of life's progress. Intellectual courage consists in actively and vitally preserving this instant of nascent knowledge, of making it the unceasing fountain of our intuition, and of designing, with the subjective history of our errors and faults, the model of a better, more illuminated life. Thank you, Gaston Bachelard. And then last was on the subject of emotional intelligence, the contemplative Alain de Botton of the School of Life over in the UK. It was the philosophers, he said, of ancient Greece who first identified these problems and described the structural deficiencies of our minds with a special term. They proposed that we suffer from akrasia, commonly translated as, quote, weakness of will, a habit of not listening to what we accept should be heard, and a failure to act upon what we know is right. It is because of akrasia that crucial information is frequently lodged in our minds without being active in them, and it is because of akrasia that we often both understand what we should do and resolutely omit to do it. All right, some poems for us. We often feel the downside of those who don't live or choose, or see the downside of those who don't live or choose to live intuitively, but follow society's conditioning, often unblinkingly. And we've all had experiences. I've certainly had them where I'm very observant of that. I'm not judgmental, but I'm observant, and it's a contrast to where I am, and an affirmation of where I am for myself anyway. This poem was written down in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., a few Novembers ago. Are You Adopted, it's called. I see around the corners of a Sunday breakfast table, visiting old friends of decades I haven't seen in years, how some people adopt or assume unchanging personas, kinds of chrysalises, carapaces, self-confined ways of talking, gesturing, querying, thinking. How they choose, consciously or not, to operate inside so many borders, gates, layers of Troy, versus the borderless, break-free places they could go, explore, discover, be, anytime, all the time. To me, the time to fly free on our own is absolutely now. I would say now, maybe in these times, more than ever now, and not stay shelled in, held in. This is a poem I actually read in one other broadcast, a number of them back, called The Encapsulated Man. Flies through space and time, contained by the culture. Content or not, he stays in his suit and well-constructed shell as he rockets instead of pilots through life, guided not by his own volition, let alone intuition, but by a distant mission control that's mindful of its own needs, heedless of his. He, throughout, rarely, barely, or none, the wiser. Encapsulated Man. I had read a poem last week, a different poem by a poet newer to me. Her name is Mary Ruffel, and she wrote this book called My Private Property Collection of Poems, and I came across this one earlier today when I was putting our broadcast together. Personalia. When I was young, a fortune teller told me that an old woman who wanted to die had accidentally become lodged in my body. Slowly, over time, and taking great care in following esoteric instructions, including lavender baths and the ritual burial of keys in the backyard, I rid myself of her presence. Now, I am an old woman who wants to die, and lodged inside me is a young woman dying to live. I work on her. Interesting. She was the one who I read that piece about green sadness when we were talking about last week's theme. There are deep intuitions. I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling that are uncomfortable. They're not bad or necessarily hard, but, well, they could be hard. But they're uncomfortable, but they're real, they're resonant. And even these, we're better off paying attention to all of them than denying any of them. And I had an experience, I'm going to read a piece that came after this, but I had an experience with my dear mother, who is not alive, has been gone for some years, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, she had a heart attack. And I was living in New York, she was living in New Jersey, where I grew up, and I stopped everything I was doing, and every day I would go out to the hospital there and sit with her most of the day, hold her hand, talk with her, just be with her. And the doctor said, oh, yes, she'll be through. It was a big event, but she's going to get through it. And she was a pretty strong woman. Interesting that each day that I was there of that particular week, and with lots of work piling up behind me, I had every night I started feeling a pressure in my chest, as if someone was putting blankets, like lead blankets, and every night was one more, and it was tremendous weight, and starting to feel that she wasn't going to make it, even though I was being told she was going to make it. So my intuition was very, ever stronger every day, and I didn't want to believe that, take that in, and the one day I said, Mom, I've got to go back, take one day off, I'll be back the following day and continue on with you to catch up on some work, was the day that she passed away with an even bigger heart attack. And was able to go, obviously. I think I do believe in that, was able to leave, but that intuition was so there, and it taught me a lot about listening to those things, a lot more anyway. So this was a poem I wrote for her soon after her death. It's called Mom, from my mother, Maureen Cassidy. You took off with surprise in your eyes, holding onto your halo, heading for beyond. No time for goodbyes, farewells, or swan songs, or even one long sigh. Don't worry. Without a doubt, you'll blow out those 100 birthday candles somewhere, and I'll sing you a shower of pennies from heaven while your white umbrella is upside down. That was for you, Mom. Miss her greatly, but she's in my molecules. Inspired we can be by greatly intuitive people that are around us now, have been in our past, ideally will meet in our future. Touchstones to intuitiveness. I've known many, like the remarkable imagist Richard Kale out in Seattle. And this is called Love Letters to the Universe. The marvelous title of an imagist friend's book, the very kind I send by hand and often to that address, universal delivery. Readable by any and everyone ready to open into a nature and spirit loving, fully living correspondence. Letters I stamp and post that the universe faithfully, feelingly answers in sign language to my address. Very personal delivery that I open to and read eagerly, serendipitously. Love letters to the universe. I know I'm often invoking David Whyte, but he is such a marvelously spirited and soulful and a wise poet to me and philosopher of his kind. And I was listening to a program that he was doing recently, and he read this poem. I believe he read it in one of the last programs, and it struck me for tonight to bring in. All about living intuitively. It's called The Seven Streams. Come down drenched at the end of May with the cold rain so far into your bones that nothing will warm you except your own walking, and let the sun come out at the day's end by Slieven Glasha with the rainbows doubling over Moloch Moor, and see your clothes streaming in the bright air. Be a provenance of something gathered, a summation of previous intuitions. Let your vulnerabilities, walking on the cracked, sliding limestone, be this time not a weakness, but a faculty for understanding what's about to happen. Stand above the seven streams, letting the deep down currents surface around you, then branch and branch as they do back into the mountain. And as if you were able for that flow, say the few necessary words and walk on, broader and cleansed for having imagined. Thank you, David Whyte. Some springs back in Cobble Hill, where I did a number of private poet and residencies, artist in residencies. Lovely couple sponsored me, Molly McBride and Erika Cardoso. This is when I think of intuition. Love invites us to freely embrace all or so many of our best self and profound self-knowing. And this poem is called What to Do, with a beautiful heart opening there before you. A beautiful spirit shining sun-like toward you. A beautiful mind meditating with you. A beautiful body feeling passion for you. A beautiful presence inviting you. But love, greatly love. What to do? But love, greatly love. Following our one's source wisdom can take you to the most remarkable places of self-discovery. I probably have your own stories. I'd like to hear some of those stories. I hope you'll share them with me, or, I'd welcome communing about those things. This was a poem about that called Depth Finder. And I actually pair this with a lovely vintage. Most images I pair are with my own visual poems, but this was a beautiful vintage image from Japan, I think from the 1910s or 20s or 30s, of some pearl divers. And it's wonderful with this piece. It's this Depth Finder piece. Going down like a naked pearl diver in a greater breath, into jade and sapphire waters, into an undersea of living treasures of the body, heart, soul, showed me how much more deeply I could go inside another, inside myself, how much more deeply I could dive, love, and be loved. Depth Finder. Our intuitions can also reveal greater layers of our being, interesting layers, and especially the sacred layer, I'd say. I'm going to call it sacred with a small s, but a strong s. What is this presence? This was written in Nobleboro, Maine, a few Octobers ago. What is this presence? I awoke one night to this profound feeling. I couldn't easily explain it to myself at all, but I sensed it and then sought some words for it here. Close around me in the night darkness, in the deep stillness, enfolding me like a lover with such tenderness, like a mother with such benevolence. Is it the presence of the land and water I lie above? Is it a soft, silent angel revealing its protecting wings? Or my own spirit, my anima, holding me so transcendently and showing me I'm really a body inside a breathing soul? What is this presence? I see, as some of you may, intuition as a liberating force. I think that's a through line here tonight, now. An energy, an opportunity for transformation for us at any given point in our life and the arc of our life. Becoming a butterfly. Written one spring back in Convent Station, New Jersey. Brightly colored, abundantly winged, lighter than air. To become one, you must climb out of your chrysalis, out of your carapace, your unmetamorphosed self. Discover, then enter your newer, truer form and fly off, fly forth, flutter freely into the wider, wilder world. I've found that the way of intuition is light-filled, inner light, outer light, all kinds of, I'm very moved by light of all kinds, but certainly the inner light, maybe more than most. And ever enlightening, and the more we go there, the more you will want to continue to go there. And so I thought this piece tonight, take the light path. The light of foot path, the light of heart and mind path. A bright, inviting, life-dappled, love-leafed path, a soul-whole soul path, sunlighted by day, moon-lanterned by night, open to you, ready for you, calling you there. Take the light path. So, as we wind out yet again this week, a few last things. John O'Donohue said, we live between the act of awakening and the act of surrender. Each morning we awaken to the light and the invitation to a new day in the world of time. Each night we surrender to the dark, to be taken to play in the world of dreams where time is no more. At birth we were awakened and emerged to become visible in the world. At death we will surrender again to the dark, to become invisible. Awakening and surrender, they frame each day and each life. Between them the journey where anything can happen, the beauty and the frailty. Philosopher, poet John O'Donohue, thank you. Thank you. Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book Big Magic, says, this, I believe, is the central question upon which all creative living hinges. Do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? Surely something wonderful is sheltered inside you. I say this with all confidence because I happen to believe we are all walking repositories of buried treasure. I believe this is one of the oldest and most generous tricks the universe plays on us human beings, both for its own amusement and for ours. The universe buries strange jewels deep within us all and then stands back to see if we can find them. The hunt to uncover those jewels, that's creative living. the courage to go on that hunt in the first place, that's what separates a mundane existence from a more enchanted one. Thank you, Elizabeth Gilbert. I'm all for the enchanted life. And so, the two last pieces of the time now, mine, for us, I surrender willingly to the mystery, to the flow, to the source, to the soulful, to the wisdom of my intuition, callings, discoveries, to life stories and songs, wanting to be heard, waiting to be told, to its serendipities and its telltale full-scale harmonies. I surrender to a deeper humanity, humility, sense of innocence. So, we can trust ourselves to yield to what's wisely inside, wanting to be expressed. Yeah, that sort of echoes a bit of our Donahue there in a way. And last, keep expanding. I say let nothing and no one stand in the way of following your intuitive guidance that opens you to such riches if you let it. Keep expanding. Crazy, isn't it? How easy it is to keep the conception of ourselves and others so small, so Lilliputian. How seemingly simple to draw so many borders around our beings and theirs, when who we are and who they are is often so much bigger, so much wider and deeper than we choose to believe or open our self-limiting selves to even imagine. So, I've made it a personal mission, a cause célèbre, to expand, to keep expanding my awareness, my consciousness, conscientiousness of the endless dimensions, great realms, greater wealth of possibilities that may reside inside this man, that woman, flowering child, a dear friend, lover, passing stranger. Thank you each and all for floating in again, for feeling in, and in these pandemically tossed times, helping support these programs and my poetic arts with donations. All contributions are welcome and are easily made by PayPal and Venmo and directly through my site, as are private invitations from patrons to be an artist in residence for a given span or to sponsor one of my evolving poetic arts projects. Your enthusiasm, however, is what I value most. Meanwhile, I invite your questions, which I'll be speaking to in a special added broadcast in late November, so email any ones you have to me at colin@thepoetorialist.com. Colin with one L. Remember, all the show replays are online. I invite you to lean in again next week or beyond. Until then, dear listeners, good days ahead, days of trusting and following your deeper intuition. And good spirits.